What happens when the darkness hiding beneath a family's facade finally comes to light? When secrets, buried deep for years, erupt in a moment of shocking violence? It all started with a simple argument, a dispute, one that seemed almost trivial. But what followed was anything but. A respected pastor, a family torn apart by grief and betrayal, and a tragedy that would forever alter the course of their lives. But the question remains, what really happened that night? A brutal beating, a violent act in a quiet Ohio home, but was it truly an accident? Was it really just a moment of rage or something far more calculated, more twisted, lurking beneath the surface? How did a family, seemingly bound by faith, unravel so quickly, so violently? The community believed they knew the man, known as a pillar of faith, a man of integrity. His words filled the pews every Sunday. His family, once the picture of stability, was revered. But behind the closed doors of their home, a different story was unfolding. There, a secret darkness simmered, a brewing storm of betrayal, resentment, and hidden pain. And that night, everything came crashing down. The beating wasn't just an outburst. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue or a moment of poor judgment. Something darker, something more menacing had been building for years. What happened next would shake the community to its very core. But even now, after all the investigation, the questions remain. What drove one man to shatter everything he'd built? What hidden truths were exposed in that moment of violence? And most haunting of all, could this have been prevented? As we dive deeper, we'll piece together the events, the timeline, the shattered lives, and the ripple effect that continues to echo through every corner of this town. A community in shock. A family broken. And a secret so dark, it may never fully be revealed. Stick with us, because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about this tragic story. The quiet town of Cedarbrook, Ohio, was known for its sense of calm, a place where the streets seemed to hum with peace, and the people held strong, unwavering faith. It was a community built on values, where families gathered in the local church, where smiles were shared across the pews, and where the world outside seemed a distant echo. At the center of it all stood Pastor Gregory Carter, a man revered by his congregation, admired by his community, a leader who shaped lives with his teachings. His voice was a beacon of hope, guiding the hearts of many, a source of solace in times of trial. But on one fateful night, the peaceful veneer of Cedarbrook cracked open. The walls of this once idyllic family were shattered, not by a storm or natural disaster, but by violence, raw, horrifying violence that would leave the town reeling. Pastor Gregory Carter, in an explosive fit of rage, savagely attacked his wife, Maria, a woman who had stood beside him for years. In a moment of blind fury, he beat her into unconsciousness, sending her into a coma that would alter the course of their lives forever. Now, it's easy to dismiss this as a crime of passion, an isolated event spurred by anger or frustration. But there's so much more beneath the surface. Something that has yet to be uncovered. As the story began to unfold, the truth revealed itself in ways no one could have anticipated. The children, his own flesh and blood, who had grown up in the shadow of this man, did not react in any way that could be explained by grief or shock. They didn't cry out for help, nor did they rush to the aid of their unconscious mother. No, what came next was far darker, more unimaginable than anyone could have foreseen. It wasn't a desperate attempt at saving her, but a chilling act of retribution that would leave the town in shock. They turned on their father. The very man who had raised them, guided them in the ways of the Lord. They turned on him with a fury of their own, and in a gruesome act, dismembered his body in a way that would leave investigators with more questions than answers. The crime scene, discovered early in the morning, was one of the most disturbing in recent memory. The disarray, the violence, and the sheer brutality of the act pointed to something more than mere family drama. Something darker was at play. The Carter family, once considered the model of religious devotion and harmony, was now the epicenter of a nightmare. But what could have pushed this family, seemingly so perfect, to the brink of violence and chaos? How did a man of God, trusted by his community, a symbol of virtue, transform into a violent monster? Was this a one-time eruption of anger, or was there something festering beneath the surface for years? And what about the children? How could they commit such an unspeakable act? Were they merely defending their mother, or was there more to their involvement? At the heart of this unraveling tragedy was a secret, a hidden truth that would leave everyone in shock. Pastor Gregory Carter had been having an affair that no one saw coming. His lover? A trans woman, a relationship that was kept under wraps, buried beneath the righteous image he had so carefully cultivated. The revelation of this affair would bring with it a cascade of secrets, lies, and deceptions that no one in Cedarbrook could have anticipated. Secrets that, when exposed, would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. But how did this family, once revered, once respected by all who knew them, descend into such madness? What was the final spark that ignited this horrifying series of events? And who truly bore the blame in this tale of familial destruction? Let's dig deeper and try to unravel the web of betrayal, secrets, and violence that has shattered this community forever. For years, he was a beacon of hope, a pillar of strength in a community that trusted him, revered him. In their eyes, he was the embodiment of faith itself. A pastor with a golden reputation, his sermons delivered with a charisma that could move even the most hardened hearts. His marriage was one to envy, it seemed. The kind of marriage that appeared flawless in the eyes of anyone looking from the outside. He had the picture-perfect family, a beautiful wife, 2 children, well-behaved, seemingly happy. No one knew what lay behind the closed doors of that carefully curated life. No one could have imagined that the life of this man, a man who preached love and kindness, could shatter so completely, so violently. Before the tragedy that would unravel everything, the pastor was the very image of success. He was respected in the church, beloved by his congregation, admired for his kindness. To outsiders, his family seemed like a portrait of devotion. His wife, a woman of grace and quiet strength, stood at his side, always smiling, always supporting. To the community, they were untouchable. But, behind the surface, things were beginning to change. It started with whispers that would later prove to be far more than rumors. The pastor had begun spending more time away from home, away from his family. And when he was home, his attention seemed distant, as if his mind was elsewhere. What no one could have guessed was that his attention had found its way to someone who would become a key player in the unraveling of everything. A secret. An affair. She was someone no one saw coming. A trans woman, a person with a past so different from his own that it should have never been a possibility. Yet, there she was, woven into the fabric of his secret life, far from the public eye. She was not the kind of woman anyone could have expected him to fall for, let alone become entangled with in such an intimate, dangerous way. And yet, their connection was undeniable, even if it was something the pastor worked desperately to keep hidden. The affair became the catalyst for a chain of events that would soon explode beyond anyone's control. With every stolen moment, every secret meeting, the pastor's world began to fray. The tension between him and his wife grew. She could feel it, knew something wasn't right. But what could she do? The man she had married, the father of her children, had become a stranger. And the violence? It began with small cracks. A comment here, an accusation there. But soon, it escalated, fueled by the lies, the guilt, the secrets eating him alive. And on that fateful night, the violence reached its breaking point. In the still of the evening, a fight broke out. Words were exchanged, accusations, recriminations, years of unspoken frustration boiling over. And in the heat of the moment, the pastor snapped. What happened next remains one of the most horrific parts of the story, the beating. It wasn't a single act of violence, but a prolonged, brutal assault. The wife, his wife, was left unconscious, battered, lying in a coma. The man who had promised to love, honor, and cherish her had done the unthinkable. Why? What led him to such an act? A psychological profile of the pastor, with his growing emotional turmoil, reveals a man who felt trapped. Trapped in his lies, in his guilt, and perhaps, in his own twisted sense of what he believed to be the right path. The affair had consumed him, unraveling his mind, and when faced with his wife's suspicions, he panicked. In that moment of panic, he acted out with a ferocity that spoke to something deeper, something darker than anyone had realized. But the beating wasn't the end of it. Far from it. The children, his own flesh and blood, were the first to discover the truth. As they witnessed the chaos unravel, they too began to see the cracks. The father they had known, the man they had looked up to, was no longer the person they thought he was. Their relationship with him shifted. The once loving father-daughter bond fractured, poisoned by their discovery of the affair, the abuse of their mother, the lies that now seemed to stretch beyond the confines of anything they could understand. The tension was undeniable. Their pain, visible. The question remains, was this violence something the pastor had planned all along? Or was it an act of desperation, a tragic breakdown in the face of mounting pressures? But the story does not end here. No, this family's tragedy only turns darker still. Far darker. The pastor had once been the heart of his community. He was a figure of strength, a symbol of devotion. His words carried weight, his presence commanded respect. But that man, the man his congregation believed in, was gone. Disappeared. In his place was a broken man, driven by guilt, desire, and fear. A man whose hidden life could no longer be contained, whose actions would haunt his family forever. For months, no one suspected a thing. The church continued to stand tall, the congregation continued to worship, and the pastor continued to lead. The perfect family, the perfect marriage, it was a narrative so seamless that even those closest to him could not see the cracks forming beneath the surface. But cracks there were, and eventually, they couldn't be ignored. As the affair deepened, as his behavior grew more erratic, the tension in the house became unbearable. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And then it happened. The night when the violence erupted, the night that would forever change the lives of the pastor's family. His wife, the woman he had vowed to cherish, was left unconscious, clinging to life. The pastor, once a beacon of hope, had become a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. But what pushed him to this breaking point? This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't an act of a man who simply lost control in a moment of anger. No, this was the product of a life lived in shadows, a soul tortured by guilt and fear, and a mind unmoored from reason. But what about the children? How could they reconcile the father they once knew with the man who committed such violence? How could they ever forgive him? So let me ask you this, what do you think made the children snap like this? Could there have been another way to handle this tragedy? Did the pastor's affair push them over the edge? Perhaps there were moments when the children saw glimpses of the man they once adored. Maybe there were times when they questioned everything they knew. Could they have chosen a different path? A different way to process the pain? Or was the emotional toll of living in such a fractured world simply too much to bear? And what about the authorities? What should they have done? How could they have handled this case differently? Could this tragedy have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized earlier? How do you think the authorities should have handled this case? Let us know in the comments. As the pieces of this tragic story continue to unfold, the question remains, could there have been a different ending? Could the cycle of pain have been stopped before it spiraled into this darkness? If you're still with us, if you're ready to see how this tragedy unfolds, don't forget to hit like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe. You won't want to miss the next part of this in-depth breakdown. The story is far from over, and the truth, well, it's about to get much darker. He had everything. A family who adored him, a community that looked up to him, a reputation that seemed unshakable. On the outside, he was a man of faith, an inspiration to those who listened to his sermons, a husband to a woman who appeared to be his perfect match. Together, they built a life that seemed unassailable. But, as is often the case with those who appear untouchable, there were cracks beneath the surface, cracks that would soon widen, that would soon swallow everything in their path. But there's something you may not have realized. The whispers began months before it all exploded, the whispers of a life lived in secret, of desires that should never have been acted upon. The pastor's affair, his secret life, was the tipping point. But after the fight, the situation went beyond what anyone could expect. The pastor, once a man of faith, let his emotions take control. And in that moment, in the heat of the confrontation, the darkness inside him finally broke free. He lashed out, striking his wife with such violence, she fell unconscious, her life hanging by a thread. The silence that followed was deafening. But it wasn't just the pastor who would bear the consequences of this tragedy. The children, caught in the chaos, no longer had a father. They had only a man they no longer recognized, a man who had broken them in ways they couldn't understand. The hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, it weighed on them. And then, came the unimaginable. The family would become killers themselves. The walls of the courtroom pulse with the gravity of the case, as voices rise in a tangled mess of accusations and defense. The cameras flash, but there's no escaping the aftermath. The shockwaves from that night still echo through their lives, but the story has only just begun. As the court case continues to unfold, so too does the ripple effect, pulling in everyone, family, community, even the authorities. And as we move forward, we'll uncover what led the children to the breaking point, and what choices they made in the wake of their own devastating trauma. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more in-depth breakdowns of cases like this. Let us know your thoughts on what's next in the comments below. She was once the anchor of her family, a mother, a wife. A woman who had built her life on the foundation of love and trust. Her world was one of shared promises, quiet moments of joy, and the soft reassurance that, no matter what, her family would be there. But what happens when the very person you trust the most betrays you, when the man you've chosen to spend your life with turns into a stranger? This wasn't just a woman caught in a violent assault. No, this was a mother with children to care for, a wife who had to reconcile the man she loved with the monster he had become. Her body lay bruised, her mind fractured by the trauma of what had happened. But it wasn't just her body that was shattered, it was her sense of self, her sense of safety, her trust in everything she had known to be true. This wasn't just a story of violence, it was the story of a woman fighting for her very survival. Fighting not only for her life but for the hope of reclaiming something she had lost forever. And then we have him. The pastor. A man who had everything, a family that adored him, a community that revered him. He was a symbol of faith, a beacon of hope. But beneath the surface, behind the walls of his sanctified life, there were cracks, deep, hidden cracks that no one could see. What was it that turned him into the man who could commit such brutality? Was it the affair, the secret life he had been leading, the lies he had been telling? Or was there something else, something darker that had been festering in him long before the affair ever began? Something he could no longer keep buried? The pastor's mind, once focused on guiding others, had become clouded by guilt, lust, and fear. The weight of his choices, of his secrets, had become too much to bear. But when the moment came, when the rage exploded from within him, was it the affair that pushed him to the brink? Or was there something deeper, something more primal, at play? And what of the children, the innocent bystanders in this horrific tale? They had grown up in a home full of love, of warmth. They had trusted their father, believed in him. But now everything was a lie. The man they once adored had turned into something monstrous, and they were left in the rubble of his destruction. What drove them to act as they did? What pushed them to take matters into their own hands in the wake of such violence? Was it fear? Was it the betrayal? Or was it something deeper, a desire for justice, or revenge, that they could not escape? You see, this isn't just about the attack. It's about everything that led up to it, everything that broke along the way. It's about the pain of a mother who trusted, only to have that trust shattered. It's about the downfall of a man who thought he could keep his secrets hidden, until those secrets turned into something uncontrollable. And it's about the children who were forced to grow up too fast, who were caught in the middle of a storm they had no power to stop. In the end, it's a tragedy for all involved, one that leaves us with questions that will never fully be answered. What could have been done differently? Was there a moment when everything could have changed, when the cycle of pain could have been broken? Or were they all trapped, unable to escape the consequences of their choices? No matter where you look in this story, there is no easy answer. There is only loss, loss of life, loss of innocence, and, perhaps most painfully, the loss of trust. The kind of trust that, once broken, can never be fully repaired. This is not just a story about violence. It is a story about what happens when trust is shattered beyond repair. And it is a story that will continue to haunt the family, and anyone who dares to understand it, for years to come. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple case, one that wouldn't make waves outside the quiet, unassuming town. But as the details began to unfold, it became clear that this was anything but ordinary. What started as an investigation into a missing person quickly spiraled into something much darker, something far more unsettling. Law enforcement arrived at the scene, their initial shock giving way to a methodical search for answers. The crime scene was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a place that, on the surface, should have been safe, but now, it felt unrecognizable. There was no way to fully prepare for the discovery that lay ahead. The pastor, once the revered leader of this tight-knit community, was found in the most distressing of circumstances. The scene itself didn't just tell a story of violence, it raised more questions than it answered. As investigators combed through the evidence, they found more than just physical remnants, they found pieces of a puzzle, scattered and fragmented, offering no clear answers but hinting at something much deeper. Bloodstains, marks of struggle, and objects that once held meaning now seemed to mock the peaceful life the town once knew. And then, there was the discovery that would shake the town to its core, the children. How had they become entangled in this nightmare? The forensic team worked relentlessly, uncovering more each day, painting a picture that was as disturbing as it was incomplete. The trauma the children had experienced, both seen and unseen, seemed to be an unspoken part of the story. But even as the pieces started to come together, there was still no explanation for the brutality that had unfolded. What had triggered this? What had led them down this path? The public's reaction was swift, and with it came disbelief. How could children, those who were once seen as innocent and pure, possibly be involved in such a crime? The questions came flooding in, each more urgent than the last. Families in the community held their loved ones a little closer, unsure of who or what could be trusted. Shock and confusion spread as neighbors and friends tried to reconcile what they knew of the children with the accusations now facing them. As the investigation continued, the media's coverage intensified. Everyone wanted to know why these children, why this pastor, why now? The townspeople, who had once looked upon their neighbors with familiarity, were now forced to face an unimaginable reality. It was as if the very fabric of their lives had been torn apart, leaving only confusion and fear in its wake. The legal process that followed became just as complex as the case itself. The charges leveled against the children were serious, but were they the result of something they couldn't control? Psychological evaluations were conducted, and the question of whether trauma played a role in their actions became central to the defense. Could the environment they grew up in, possibly filled with neglect, manipulation, or abuse, serve as an explanation for their involvement? Legal experts were divided. Some believed that the children's actions were influenced by factors beyond their control, others argued that the gravity of their crime could not be overlooked. It became clear that this case wouldn't be simple, it would challenge every assumption the community had about the line between innocence and guilt. With the trial looming, the stakes grew higher. The children's defense attorneys prepared to present their case, likely emphasizing the psychological toll their past had taken. The prosecution, however, would argue that no matter the circumstances, the crime was unforgivable. And in the public eye, the lines began to blur. Was this a case of two innocent lives ruined, or was there something more chilling at play? As the courtroom drama unfolded, it became clear that the ultimate question wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about the shadows that lingered, unseen and unknown, just beneath the surface of a quiet town. Would the truth be uncovered, or would it remain forever hidden? When the dust settled and the headlines faded from the front pages, it was far from over. The case had left a permanent mark, not just on the small town, but on the very people who once lived normal lives. The kind of lives that seemed so far removed from the unimaginable violence that had unfolded in their midst. Yet here they were, the ones who would bear the weight of what had happened, for years to come. For the children involved, the consequences were far-reaching. No one could have prepared them for what would follow. Life as they knew it was over, and it wasn't just the world around them that had shifted, it was the very core of who they were. The trauma was etched into their minds, lingering long after the last courtroom doors had closed. How does one begin to recover from something so violent, something so incomprehensible? There was no simple answer. The children were left to navigate a world that suddenly saw them not as kids, but as the very embodiment of a nightmare. The system would try to offer support, but would it be enough to erase the echoes of what they had done? Could they ever heal? Then, there was the wife, the woman who had once stood beside the pastor, proud of the life they had built together. The tragedy had ripped her world apart, leaving her to pick up the pieces in the aftermath. The emotional toll was insurmountable. To lose a loved one, especially in such an unthinkable manner, would devastate anyone, but to also grapple with the fact that her own children were responsible for the violence was a different kind of suffering. Could she ever move past the grief, or would it be something that haunted her forever? And what kind of recovery was even possible for her? In the wake of the tragedy, the media machine shifted into high gear. The story, so shocking and raw, quickly gained national attention. News outlets across the country picked up the case, each eager to unearth new angles, new details that would further feed the public's hunger for answers. Interviews were conducted, law enforcement spoke about their painstaking investigation, and experts weighed in with their analysis. It was all anyone could talk about. How had this happened? What had gone wrong? The community's disbelief was mirrored by the rest of the country, as people scrambled to make sense of the horror. Some saw it as a cautionary tale, others as a sad, inevitable tragedy. But no matter how it was framed, the story stuck in the minds of those who followed it. For some, it was just another news story. For others, it was something that lingered, a question they couldn't stop asking. And then there were the emotional and psychological effects, things that could not be neatly packaged or easily explained. The children who had been thrust into this nightmare were now left to wrestle with the emotional aftermath of their actions. Could they even comprehend the magnitude of what they had done? Could they reconcile the fact that their world had once been safe, that the people they had trusted were now gone? The psychological scars were deep, not just from what they had experienced, but from what they had inflicted. How could they ever return to some semblance of normalcy? The question lingered, what happens to children exposed to such violence, such unimaginable acts? Was there any coming back from it? The trauma would follow them, shaping their future in ways no one could fully understand. How could they move forward when their past was so laden with horror? And what would become of their relationships, their sense of trust? Could they ever trust themselves, let alone anyone else? But as the family tried to pick up the pieces and navigate their new reality, one thing became clear: there were more layers to this case than anyone had yet uncovered. The secrets that had been buried, the hidden truths that had gone unnoticed in the frenzy of the investigation, were beginning to surface. There were whispers, strange gaps in the narrative, things that didn't quite add up. And just as the family's darkest secrets were laid bare for the world to see, the story didn't end there. No, it was far from over. What began as a quiet life, tucked away in a town where everyone knew each other's name, soon became a story that would leave the entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about family, trust, and the unthinkable. Behind closed doors, the pastor's affair and the years of unresolved domestic tension were just the beginning of a sequence of events that would push a family to a point of no return. The affair, the lies, the emotional and physical abuse that simmered beneath the surface, these were the factors that, little by little, began to erode the foundation of a family. But it wasn't just the adults who were caught in this destructive cycle. The children, those once innocent bystanders, found themselves trapped in a storm they didn't understand. What began as a slow unraveling of a marriage soon escalated into something far more violent, far more tragic than anyone could have ever imagined. The violent response from the children, shocking, horrifying, was a result of years of turmoil, hidden anger, and a desperation that, perhaps, had nowhere else to go. In one explosive moment, everything changed, and the entire community was left to pick up the pieces. In the aftermath, the scars of the crime didn't just affect those directly involved. The ripples spread out, touching every corner of the town. The children, still so young, now had to face the consequences of their actions, while the mother, shattered by loss and betrayal, had to find a way to rebuild. But as the years passed, the question remained, could any of them ever truly heal? And even if they could they ever forgive themselves? In the end, what drove a family to such extremes? Were there any signs we missed before the violence escalated? And what does justice look like in a case like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The answers may never be fully understood, but the story, with its countless layers of pain, neglect, and violence, leaves us all to ponder the deeper questions. How do families fall apart? And what does it take to prevent tragedy before it strikes? Next time, we'll take a look at how families can sometimes spiral into tragedy like this one, and why early intervention is so critical. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who needs to hear this story. Until next time, stay safe.